I don't know who this Mary Beth person is, but suspect. Seth, you know what I'm talking about. All right, part O of the note, sustainable agriculture. What is sustainable agriculture, Quinte? You need to get your book out, get your life together. Donovan, what's sustainable agriculture?
It's where
All right, where it says sustainable agriculture on page 296, Andrew, start reading. Go.
fills the need for food and fiber while enhancing the quality of the soil.
No, keep going.
Minimizing the use of non-renewable resources and allowing economic availability for the farmer.
Viability. Keep going.
It emphasizes the ability to continue agriculture on a given piece of land indefinitely through conservation and soil improvement.
So when you're defining sustainable agriculture, that's a good point right there. Emphasizes the ability to continue agriculture on a piece of land indefinitely through conservation and soil improvement. So maintaining the soil, okay, conserving what you have, and keeping that growth going throughout. Good hustle. Keep that growth going indefinitely. That means into the future without limit. Aiden, continue from there.
Sustainable agriculture often requires more labor than industrial agriculture, which makes it more expensive in places where labor costs are high. Practitioners of sustainable agriculture consider the improved long-term productivity of the land to be worth this extra cost, however.
All right, so who's taking economics in here? You three. Good. All right, in economics, what do we call this analysis that they're doing to determine whether it's worth it or not?
I don't know. I don't think
I know what you're talking about, but I can't.
Cost-benefit analysis. Good. You might have heard of that one before?
Yeah.
Cost-benefit? Okay. Sure. So the cost-benefit analysis is, the question is the cost worth the benefits you get out of it? So is the cost of an increased cost in food worth like getting an organic product that's made, that's grown on a land where it's more sustainable and can last into the future and doesn't use as much pesticide? So those are questions that you guys have to answer as you get older and become adults and you're buying your own food products and things and where you get stuff from. Is the added cost worth the benefit you get for that long-term longevity and the impact on the environment? Or is it more beneficial just to buy a lot of cheap stuff now and then not have anything long-term? Something you need to think about, Trent. All right, next thing. The goal of soil conservation is to what?
To grow things and keep it for future generations.
Well, that's sustainable agriculture. What's the goal of soil conservation, Jordan?
To be able to keep growing stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was looking for something a little more simple to conserve the soil. And then the effect of that would be so that you can keep growing stuff indefinitely, okay? So maintain the soil, you can keep growing. We're going to watch, I got a few minutes cut out of the Greening the Desert video that I told you about the other day. I really think it's a really good video if you're into watching, soil conservation videos on the side, maybe with your significant other, a special someone, your imaginary friend, you know what I'm talking about. So, but anyway, we're going to watch a couple minutes of it just so you get an idea of the fairly rapid change that can take place when you use the right resources, the right techniques. You can take an area that's very desert-like and create some decent, productive soil to grow food. I know it's very hard for you guys. It's hard for me to wrap my head around, even though I'm pretty well traveled. But I know it's hard for you guys to wrap your head around, especially when you have pretty much an unlimited amount of food available to you. You can go to the grocery store, you can go to the lunchroom, and you get about whatever food you need, and you throw away a ton of it. It's hard to fathom what it's like to be in an area where it's super dry, and you're dependent upon that year's crops is going to determine whether you or your family starve or are malnourished throughout the rest of the year. That's something that's difficult for most of us to process and think about. But there are a lot of people in a lot of places that have to deal with that, okay? So, how do we conserve the soil? Methods include contour plowing. So on page 297, contour plowing. Who wants to define that one? Donovan. You can I would prefer your own words. That definition is pretty lengthy.
Is it where like you like plow in a certain your own certain creative way or like?
Well, if you look here, they talked about this on the biggest little farm, and you can see a picture at the top of 297 on the right side there. Contour plowing is when you go with the contours of the land. So the way that the hills rise and fall, the way that there's little hollers and drains and stuff that go, you're basically running parallel to to areas of elevation. So what happens when you're contour plowing? You create like a series of steps as you go down in elevation. And the purpose of contour plowing is to what?
Prevent erosion.
Yeah, so to maintain the soil, to prevent erosion, to prevent nutrient loss. And when you create those little steps, what does it trap?
Water.
Traps water. And so it traps water, it prevents erosion, it also helps you to grow stuff as you trap water. Those are all beneficial. You remember at the end of the biggest little farm, he talked about, he asked Alan why he created those contours, if it was to reduce erosion, runoff, and to trap water. And he's like, yeah, and it looks good. So when I was growing up, I grew up in North Alabama, and it's hillier than it is here, which it's not very hilly hardly anywhere around here. And so we had a series of, what do you call those steps that go down? You might go out on one if you're in Italy and you're standing outside your door looking over the Roman Colosseum. Terraces, good. I stayed somewhere one time in Rome, and you could overlook and see the Colosseum. But anyway, those terraces are those steps, okay, that go down, and they're what's catching that water and preventing that erosion that's taking place. And like I said, the video is really good because it shows an example of how effective that can be. Let's see. It's funny. My dad is like super, country. He's from out in the woods. Grew up in Winston County. My wife's from Atlanta, so she's really well spoken. And my dad always called terraces terses. I don't know how it got muddled together in this kind of like redneck version. But he's like, yeah, there's terses out there. And my wife never could life ever figure out what he was talking about. And I'm like, you probably call those terraces, but for some reason in the country that's got changed into terses. Anyway, next thing, wind breaks. Oh, and some of you ladies might know about contouring, or guys. What do y'all use contour for?
Like shape the face.
To shape the face. That's right. So to create certain shapes, certain lines that go. Really, that's more to create an illusion, isn't it, Ashley, than actually go with the lines of your face?
Yeah, and when women put on foundation, it makes your face look pale, so you add contour to make you look alive and not like half dead. But yeah, it is to kind of.
Donovan, tell us why you use it.
No, I never done contouring, but it was like a trend for some reason. I think last year or 2 years ago, the ab contouring was like a trend.
A lot of girls do it to make their nose look smaller.
Are you using it for that?
They do it like on the side.
I haven't done it lately, so I don't know.
Oh, you've done it before.
I've got pretty good cheekbones anyway, and this beard really does most of the contouring that I need, so I don't have to use makeup. It's an easier way of contouring the face. I never really thought I had a good jawline, so when you have a little bit of a beard, it kind of adds a certain, masculinity to your jawline. So it helps out. It's my own version of contouring, although it's much less expensive than my wife's. So anyway, wind breaks. Where do we grow most of our food? Midwest, good. So in the breadbasket, which would be the Midwestern United States, primarily grassland areas. In a lot of areas, they're really flat and they're open and there's not a lot of trees. So it gets really what? Windy. And which can get dry. If you got a lot of wind coming through, it can dry out very quickly. And then we've all heard of the issues with the Dust Bowl where you have loose, exposed soil. So what could farmers do in order to prevent and slow down those winds, which would reduce erosion? What?
Plant trees.
Plant trees. So if you planted windbreaks in between or around your farm, you can reduce the amount of wind coming through. And then the end goal of that would be to protect your soil. Okay, so remember on all of these, it's good to have a description of what these things are, but what is the why? Why are these things being done? Okay, Andrew, you getting all those? I doubt it. All right. Next thing, we talked about terracing. Let's go back to perennial crops on page 304. Perennial is a term for what?
Like, can pass through.
You're thinking of permeable. I mean, perennial. Perennial are plants that do what?
Live for a long time.
Yeah, they live for year after year after year. They come back year after year after year. And so you don't have to replant them all the time. What do we call plants that only live 1 year?
Seasonal. I mean,
Annual, good. Plants that live 2 years are called biennials. There's quite a few plants that are biennials where they'll grow 1 year. There's a lot of fruiting plants, and then they'll on the second year they put on fruit and stuff, and so we call those biennials. Y'all need to get out more. So anyway, what's the benefit if you were growing crops? If you had a crop and you could grow it, would you rather want it to be an annual or a perennial? What?
Annual.
What, Jeremiah? Perennial. You said annual. Why would you want it to be an annual, Layla?
Well, I was saying annual because, like, that way you can harvest it and grow it again next year.
No, I'm saying like it would grow back every year.
Then you want perennial.
Okay, so perennial, like you could harvest it, cut it, and then the next year it grows back. That sounds a lot like what? Grass. Good. So in your lawn, what happens every spring?
Grass dies.
Well, I mean, it dies in the fall and winter,
Sorry.
and then the spring it starts to grow back, right?
Yeah.
Do you have to plant your grass every year? No, it just grows back. So it's got the roots and stuff under the ground. They put back out, and then every year you cut it a bunch, and then the next year it just keeps growing and grows back. So imagine we had a food plant that did that. You grow it, you cut it, you eat it, the next year it grows back. You don't have to do what?
you don't have to plant again.
You don't have to plow, you don't have to plant, you don't have to do all that stuff again, which causes soil erosion. So if you had perennial plants that came back year after year and you cut them and they just came back up, there would be great benefit in protecting the soil. So an example of that on 304 is figure 1124. Read that for us, Caleb.
The root system of annual wheat is much smaller than that of intermediate wheatgrass at perennial.
Yeah, so if you look at the one on the left, the annual wheat, which is probably what we primarily get most of our wheat from for production of.
Cheerios.
Wheat's for bread, primarily, good, or Cheerios. And then on the right side, there's a wheat grass. And so basically, this kind of goes through and talks about if we can get these perennial grasses, things that we use for like wheat, if we can modify them where we get enough of production, get the production up, it would be so much more beneficial in terms of soil conservation and longevity, as far as being able to cut it every year and it coming back without having to do anything. And you can see the biggest difference between these two and their growth is what? The root structure. The root structure is drastically different. The more you live, the longer you live, the better the root structure you're going to have, right? So just like a tree. So you can see it's much more, and this would be much more resistant to drought. It would just be better all the way around. And I've heard of talk of scientists trying to genetically engineer plants where they'll be more perennial, or we'll have more perennial-based foods so that it will eliminate a lot of that soil erosion. I don't know exactly how long that'll take, where you can insert a gene where instead of just growing and dying, it's gonna maintain root structure and then grow back the next year. Yeah.
So my mom used to have a rose garden. So all she does is like water them and trim them like every year, and then like they die out in the fall, the winter and the fall, and then they come back spring, spring and
Yeah, and a lot of roses and stuff, they'll live like hundreds of years if you take care of them. And a lot of plants are like that. So that would be beneficial where you're not having to disturb the soil constantly. All right, the next thing, this goes into soil conservation. Turn back to 298. No-till agriculture. We've talked quite a bit about this. A lot of farmers throughout the Midwest who grow a lot of these big crops, they're going toward no-till. No-till reduces what? soil erosion and runoff. Now, like I said, the drawback to this is I've got a little farm over here and I'm trying to grow a garden and stuff, but my yard or the area where I would plant is very hard. It's very compacted soil. There's not a lot of nutrients in it just because of how it was taken care of prior. And so in order to get that, if you plant on an area that's hard and compacted, you're not going to get what's not going to happen? Water's not going to get in. You can't get air in there. And you're not going to get anything to grow. Roots aren't going to grow through it very well. So you've got to get it loosened up. And there's different ways of going about it. Some people plant a lot of cover crops each year. But really to get started, I'm going to have to plow and loosen the soil. In one of the videos I watched on soil conservation, these guys in Africa, they were going through and they were using a subsoiler, which was basically just like a long plow about like that long. And it goes through and rips a hole down through deeper in the soil so that it allows it to drain and it allows it to it breaks it up a little bit. So when you have very hard compacted soil, you can't really do no-till. Unless you add a lot of stuff on top. I see a lot of y'all may have seen some of this where you have urban gardens where people are starting to garden in like parks and stuff in the city. They have shared spaces. They do a lot of no-till, but basically what they're doing is they're laying down cardboard and they're bringing in compost and soil and nutrients and stuff and just laying it on top.
That's like above ground gardens are becoming like more popular too.
Yeah, they're basically like a raised bed, big raised bed. I would say the biggest drawback for that, Sophie, is if you're doing a large one, it requires you got to bring in a lot of stuff, which is expensive. And I want to have a big, large garden, and I don't want it to be super expensive. So,
and there's like not room for it to grow. Like you can't add on to the garden.
Once you fill it up, you can't really add on or expand. So I'm in the process of where I'm tilling and planting cover crops and trying to increase nutrients and organic matter. And hopefully one day I'll get to that point where like these guys on 298, where you have good, rich topsoil that's not compacted, that's loose, and that you can just go through and plant no-till. The video I watched on conservation agriculture, like I said, it was from Africa, and they were trying to teach these local farmers, you don't burn the organic matter. Leave your organic matter on top. If you leave it on top, like if you get through planting your corn crop and you harvest it, Ashley, they were just telling them just go through and step on it and lay it over. Lay it over, smash it down, and it will hold moisture in. It will break down, but the main thing it's doing, it's helping to hold moisture in, and which is going to help the soil improve. It's going to help other stuff grow. Whereas if you till, the drawback on places like on 298 tilling, you're disturbing the soil, and when you break it up and turn it over, you're exposing it to what? The sun. And so the soil's going to do what? It's dry out. Microorganisms in the soil that benefit it in terms of growth are going to die, and then it's not going to be as productive. And also any organic matter, when you're tilling it and turning it over, that carbon is going to break down quicker and release back into the soil, air, and so you're losing a lot of your organic matter. So there's a lot of benefits of no-till, and like I say, I don't know about most, but a large portion of big farmers throughout the Midwest, where a lot of our crops are grown, are going toward no-till farming because of those soil benefits, and hopefully conserving that going forward in the future. Okay. Strip cropping. It's not as dangerous as it seems. Let's see here. On 297, I think they're really talking about intercropping here, kind of another way of saying it, where you have a crop, you have a strip of something in between. You could do this like every other row, but that would be almost impossible to harvest with like a large scale. If you were running like a large farm, Trent, you could do this where you had like maybe 4 or 5 rows of soybeans, and then you had 4 or 5 rows of corn. And so you could have one combine that goes through and gets the soybeans, and then you could have another one that comes through and gets the corn, and they're still going to put nitrogen in the soil, and they're going to share that with the corn around them. So you could have intercropping or strip cropping like that. It's just, in a small farm, you can have it every other row. It's just, you have to harvest it by hand. Let's see what else. On the next page, strategies to improve soil fertility. Why do farmers rotate their crops? This is almost universal now on large farms. Why do you rotate?
Keep bugs from eating.
One, it reduces pests because you're taking away the pest food for a year. What else?
It keeps your soil, like, nutrients, doesn't, like, take all the nutrients.
You don't deplete your nutrients because if you're planting corn every year, it's going to take the same stuff out year after year after year, and you're going to deplete that soil to where it's not very productive. So crop rotation helps to reduce soil nutrient loss, and it helps to also reduce pesticide usage. Now, corn, since these are the two main ones that are grown, in between corn each year, what do they plant? Or every other year? Soybeans. Why do they plant beans? You guys planted peas out there, which are in the same class. What are those called? They have nitrogen-fixing bacteria that live in these little nodules, these little white things on their roots. What are those type of plants called? Starts with an L. You need to know it. It's called legumes. Legumes. You should write that down. Legumes are plants that have nitrogen-fixing bacteria in a little home on their roots, and those bacteria take nitrogen and they convert it into ammonium and nitrate and put it in the soil. And then the next year you plant corn again. Well, there's more nitrogen for the corn and it can grow. And the same kind of benefit would be with intercropping if you planted like corn and beans in between each other. Maybe in the spring, I was hoping that we would do maybe a joint effort with Miss Strawhorn or whoever y'all have. Where'd y'all learn about the Three Sisters? Was that Push? So I'm thinking we're going to try to do or maybe in honor of what you learned in there and what we're doing in here, we'll try to do a Three Sisters garden where we use these different plants to help complement one another and to help maintain the soil and improve the soil. All right, and then let's see what else we got. Adding green manure. Why do you add manure to your farm? Why would that help out? Nutrients and organic matter. So if you just throw out pellets, like which most fertilizers are now, you buy a bag at the store, it's just fertilizer pellets you can put in the soil. That has NPK in it, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but it doesn't have organic matter. So if you use manure, it's going to have organic matter, it's going to have the different nutrients, it's going to help to build your soil. Don't use, we'll get into that in a second. I'll tell you what you can't use in your manure. Limestone. What is limestone? How does that benefit your soil? Makes it more limestone basic. So it reduces the acidity. And so basically what happens is most plants require roughly like a neutral pH. But like most soils, like our clay soils around here, usually are like 5.5 to 6. So they're acidic. So what happens is the more acidic it is, the plants that need that neutral soil, that acidity doesn't allow them to uptake the nutrients. And so they can't get as much nutrients out of the soil. They break down quicker and get pushed away. And so those plants can't grow very well. So when you add lime to the soil, raises the pH, it allows them to absorb those nutrients better. Okay? So a lot of people, y'all may have heard, some of you guys that or ladies, if you've helped out with a food plot with your dad or something, sometimes they'll lime a field. And so that liming is to help raise the pH to help with nutrient absorption. All right, rotational grazing. We're going to talk about this in the video. We've already talked about it. Why do you not want to keep your animals on the same piece of land all the time? They're going to degrade it. They're going to eat the stuff down. They're going to compact the soil. It doesn't allow it time to recover. So you rotate. You move them to one pasture, and then you move them back to another, and it allows the grass and the soil to recuperate. My dad does this with his cows. He has two fairly large pastures, and so he'll keep them on one pasture for about a month, and then he'll move them back and forth to the other. On Biggest Little Farm and some of these other operations where they really are labor intensive, I've seen them move them almost every day so that you really reduce their impact on the soil. It's just very labor intensive to do that. So that's kind of the drawback. And then the last thing, turn to 446. One thing we're going to add in is composting. Who knows what does anybody compost at home? Sophie, how do y'all compost? What is composting?
Well, our eggshells or anything kinda like that and put them in a bin, and then you put them back on the, like, once they get down, then we'll put them in the, where we plant stuff.
Put them in the garden.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a place out beside my fence where I've got a couple pallets set up, and then I've got a little piece of tin on top. And so all of our eggshells, all of our
Like,
really any
shell.
organic matter. You can do leaves, you can do grass, anything, any kind of manure. Like we throw chicken manure in there. You can't put like cat poop, dog poop, human poop. You can't put stuff that's like super high nitrogen like that. It doesn't break down very well. But almost any other type of you can't put meat in there. But almost any other kind of organic matter you can put in there. And what happens as it breaks down, you're just left with really good nutrient-rich soil. And you can add that into your, where you plant, and then it reduces the amount of fertilizer you have to use. So that's an easy thing that everybody can do at home. They can have a little compost
Just,
pile.
like, not wasting the stuff that you just throw away.
Yeah, I mean, normally they just go in the garbage can. That's exactly right. I've seen some people do it where they'll just dig a big hole in the ground and they put it in there and then they cover over it. And so naturally in the ground, stuff is going to break it down. So it's another way of going about composting. But basically, it's just you're reducing your input in garbage and you're also helping your soil. So, any questions about part O? You need to